what's up? Hello, my name is Emma, and today I am talking about the worst books I read in 2019. In 2019, I read a lot of amazing books, I read a lot of mediocre books, and I also read some really bad books, and we're going to be talking about a few of those today. Last year, I called this video my least favorite books of the year because I was like trying to be a little bit more neutral and polite, but nah, this year they're the worst. This video is going to go from the books that I thought were maybe not so terrible to, oh my god, this is legitimately the worst book I have ever read. First up, we have Save the Date by Morgan Matson. I'm honestly sad that this one is on my list because for many years I've considered myself a big fan of Morgan Matson's young adult contemporary novels, so I'm not sure if this is just an outlier among her works or if I've just sort of grown out of her style. And it was honestly kind of a roller coaster for me. Like, I liked it and then I didn't like it. And then I started to like it again and then, oh my goodness, I hated it. And then in the end, like, I did mostly like it, so sometimes I still don't really know how I truly feel about it, but it was a very inconsistent reading experience. This book started off with so much exposition, and like, I understand the need to like develop and establish familiar relationships if that's going to be a forefront of the story, but my god, there were just so many flashbacks and it was very frustrating to power through. The one thing I liked about this book is that it did focus on this big family. I love a story that has some complex family dynamics and especially siblings that are very close to one another, so that was a total highlight of my reading experience. That being said, none of the characters individually were all that interesting to me, and I especially did not like our main protagonist, Charlie. In my opinion, she was just very naive and immature in like a way that goes beyond my limits for what I think is acceptable and realistic for YA. And also the audiobook of this one was just not good. The narrator made our 17-year-old protagonist sound like a 12-year-old who was just like always wonderstruck by everything that was going on. It was very annoying. I get that it's fiction, and like, I knew I was signing up for a book where like the whole plot of it is that there's a wedding and absolutely everything possible could go wrong. But the constant mishaps and failures made the story extremely predictable to the point where I couldn't even enjoy all of the chaos anymore. By the end of the story, it just wasn't fun to read anymore because I could see all of the problems coming. So overall, definitely my least favorite Morgan Matson book, and I really did not have a good time reading it. My next least favorite book I read this year is unfortunately from one of my favorite authors, and that is Unwind by Neal Shusterman. This is actually a book I read as a part of the Paper Cut book club. We did a live show discussion if you want to hear me read with Cindy, Paperback Dreams, and Jordan Harvey discuss all of our thoughts on this book and why we didn't like them. That's in the description. This book had so much potential and very little of it came through. I feel like Neal Shusterman tried really hard to make some like great social commentary on reproductive rights with this story, but it ended up just becoming like any other YA dystopian survival story. The whole point of the story is that from ages 13 to 18, your parents can have you unwound, which basically means that you're being aborted later in life. And you'd think that would make for such an interesting discussion, but it's really not the focus of the story. I think these are honestly the most contrived friendships and relationships that I have ever read. Like, I'm being told that these people are meant to care about each other, but absolutely nothing has happened in the story for them to have any chemistry or have any reason to be attached to one another. In my opinion, this book was just unentertaining and shallow, and I know that a lot of people like really love the Unwind series. I just personally do not understand why. Next up is another book I'm kind of sad to have on this list because it is the conclusion in a series that I have considered myself to love for a very long time, and that is Bad Blood by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, the last book in the Natural series. I started reading these books when I was like 18 and I loved them so dearly, so I'm really not sure if this is another one of those situations where this is like a bizarre disappointment or if my tastes have just matured beyond the series. What I love about The Naturals is it's meant to be a series all about crime. It follows this group of teenagers who are recruited by the FBI and have all these different special skills that help them catch serial killers. It is right up my alley. Sally. And in the middle books, the story evolves to sort of involve this mastermind cult, and I thought that was still an interesting direction for the story. But now in Bad Blood, we have two different cults that are very prominent in the story, and it made it extremely difficult to follow. Like, I had absolutely no concept on the rules, the history, or anything that had to do with the two of them because they were getting so convoluted in my mind. And something else I really didn't like about this book is that it developed a really heavy reliance on these like surprise connections between different characters. It was like by the end of the story, like every single character had some connection to each other. Like every single person had like a secret sibling, a parent who was murdered, a parent who was miraculously alive, someone who was in a cult, someone who was the victim of a crime, a forbidden romance, and it was just very, very ridiculous. It was all just very unrealistic, and traditionally I'm the type of person that is really okay with suspending my disbelief to a certain point in order to enjoy an entertaining story, but it just really frustrated me in this novel. The only thing I really liked about it was the cast of characters. They are still so charming and a gang that I'll always treasure. They are like a found family that just complements each other so well, and each of them are an integral part to their team. I do feel like there wasn't necessarily enough development that I would have wanted from the story, but I love watching their interactions, and it was just enjoyable to finally finish out a story with them. That being said, my OTP did not end up together, and 17-year-old Emma is pissed. Next up is another book by not one, but two favorite authors of mine. And like, I can't believe I have to put this book on my worst books of 2019 list. But it unfortunately is The Golden Tower by Cassandra Clare and Holly Black, the fifth and final installment in the Magisterium series. I can't believe you're making me put you on this list. Why couldn't you have just been good? So this is the last book in Cassie and Holly's middle grade series, which, to be clear, has never been my favorite, and I've been very open about that. But I always pushed through because the characters were endearing, and like I love both of the authors so much, so of course I want to support all of their works. But you made it really damn hard. I just don't know what happened. Like, the entire story and every element was really watered down. And honestly, like, I feel like this is one of those stories where I wasn't necessarily super bothered while reading, but the more I think about it, the more disappointed in it I become. The characters just became like shells of what they once were. And like, the characters are what really carried this story, so it was left with nothing unique or interesting. Specifically the villain. Like, the villain in this story was the absolute worst, and this book series had some like really good scary middle grade villains, but this one was just evil for the sake of being evil. All of his motivations were taken away, and he was just annoying. I really hate to say it, but it feels like the series just like stopped being cared about, and no one put any of the effort that they used to into it. I tried really, really hard to enjoy the series over the year, and especially because book 4 was my favorite, I was like, oh my gosh, like maybe book 5 is gonna be the one to blow me away. But it could not have been further from the truth. Next up on my list of worst books I read in 2019 is 99% Mine by Sally Thorne. Now, I'm not typically an adult romance reader, but it's something I've tried to dip my toes into every once in a while, so I thought I would go with a book that I had seen a lot of people talking about on book Twitter and booktube. Turns out they were all talking about it because it was so fucking bad, and I apparently missed the memo. Oh, this book was so bad. I've got nothing. Absolutely nothing nice of substance to say about this book. The main character was like the worst kind of unlikable character there is, where she is mean and a bitch and hateful and like the absolute worst for the whole story, which like, yes, is the point, but she's so unlikable that you can't even root for her to have nice things happen and to have a happy ending. And the worst part of it is she has absolutely no development, no character arc. She's mean, gets what she wants, and oh, suddenly she's nice to people now. And on top of that, the romance wasn't even enjoyable. The two characters were so unfairly possessive of one another that it was actually disturbing, and like, I didn't even want them to end up together because their dynamic was strange. It made me feel gross. I do know there is like one Sally Thorne book that a lot of people did like, and like that was the one I think I was trying to pick up, so maybe I would read from her again in the future, but this book was quite possibly probably the biggest waste of my time. Next up on my list of least favorite books I read in 2019, we have Watching You by Lisa Jewell. So this is like your typical thriller, like somebody dies and we gotta figure out who done it. It was just quite possibly one of the worst ones I've ever read. So with the title Watching You, like I knew I had signed up for some stalking, some creepy watching of one another. Like the whole point is that it's all of these neighbors and we have to figure out who among them killed the other. But I didn't realize I signed up for 300 pages of adults just staring at each other. Just staring. This book was just so bland and boring in my opinion. It felt like the majority of the story was just us going over the same exact events among different characters. It was really dull, but it was also very confusing. Like all of the characters are introduced at the same exact time and they have very specific relationships to one another, and by the end of the story I felt like I still didn't have a grasp on who was who and who was that person's husband and their wife and their daughter. Like it was so confusing. And also the story jumps between the past, present, and police interviews, and I just don't think it suited the story well. I had absolutely no attachment to any of the characters, and all of the adults in this book are like either dumb or an absolute creep. There's no in between. The only characters I did like in this story are the two teenagers who are main characters, and honestly, like, they do the most shit in this entire book. It is all about these adults' problems, and the kids are the ones to do all the investigative work and figure everything out. And the mystery just wasn't good. Like, I picked up on the murderer immediately as they were introduced, and I don't consider myself to be someone who is always able to figure out the big plot twist in the end. It was just glaringly obvious. And then like maybe 3/4 of the way through the story, they get a big piece of evidence, and then it is basically like confirmed who the murderer is, but you still got a lot to go where they don't actually reveal it, so it wasn't even surprising anymore. Honestly, I'm pretty shocked that this book was very well received on Goodreads, because I don't understand. I said it in my review, I'll say it again. The most thrilling part of this novel was when I could return it to my library and start reading something else. Beautiful cover, god-awful book. And finally, we have made it to my least favorite book of the year, and also currently my least favorite book of all time, and that is, without a doubt, Hidden Bodies by Caroline Kepnes, the sequel to You. You is a very polarizing book, and I'm on the side of people who like really, really loved it. But after reading Hidden Bodies, I think I see what everyone hates about it. This is legitimately the worst and most unnecessary sequel ever written. One of the most disappointing things about this book is that Joe's character goes on a complete decline from the very second this story starts. In You, Joe is so fascinating because although he is a horrible person and does really heinous things, like he still has reasoning behind them, like albeit diluted reasons, but he has motivations and we understand them, and that was interesting and it made you want to keep reading more. Whereas in Hidden Bodies, he is just straight up homicidal and wants to kill anyone who annoys him. It really felt like Joe's character had hit its peak at the end of You and there was just nowhere else for him to go, so I just don't get the reasoning behind continuing with this story. Additionally, with Hidden Bodies, all of the secondary characters were so vapid and one-dimensional. With You, the characters, although they were unlikable, they were interesting and they really brought something to the story. They each had a purpose, whereas in Hidden Bodies, every single character could be replaced with somebody else and there was nothing unique or intentional about them. Hidden Bodies also lost like one of the shining elements that made You so successful, and that is the second person narrative. If you haven't read the first story, it is told from the perspective of a man to the woman that he is stalking. But with Hidden Bodies, Joe is no longer telling the story to that woman, so it just became a normal novel and it lost everything that was special about it. Oh my god, and also the biggest plot twist, the biggest, most surprising, wildest plot twist is legitimately reused from the first novel. Like they didn't even try to come up with anything fresh and new to continue this world. They just wanted to reuse the same exact story. So yeah, in my opinion, Hidden Bodies was really, really horrible. If you are a fan of the first book, I do not recommend picking up the sequel. You know what? At least this book taught me how much you can truly dislike a novel. So that concludes my video on my least favorite books that I read in 2019. I hope you guys enjoyed it. In the comments below, I would love to hear your thoughts on any of my choices and also what some of your least favorite reads of 2019 were. But that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you soon for a new one. Bye!